On top of being Secretary of State, National Security Advisor, acting archivist, and even USAID administrator, Marco Rubio is now adding another job title, something like Viceroy of Venezuela. At least that's how this Washington Post headline described him, after Trump indicated that he would be one of the people helping to, quote, run the country. Rubio made the rounds this morning on the Sunday political talk shows to try and explain what that could all look like. Watch this.
Mr. Secretary, who is in charge? Are you running Venezuela right now?
Yeah, I mean, I keep people, fixating on that. Here's the bottom line on it is we expect to see changes in Venezuela.
And are you involved in that transition,
so obviously
Secretary?
I'm very involved in this. Well, of course. I mean, I think everyone knows I'm pretty involved on politics in this hemisphere. Obviously, as Secretary of State and National Security Advisor, very involved in all these elements.
And with us now is James Sample, professor of law at Hofstra University and former attorney at the Brennan Center for Justice's Democracy Program. Also with us is Alejandro Velasco, professor of history at New York University. So glad to have both of you at the table with us this evening. So, James, I'll start with you. Kristen Welker asked him point blank, are you running Venezuela? And it wasn't really clear what the answer is.
Well, he said that, hold on, he's like, I don't know why you guys are fixated on that. Well, it's because the President of the United States told the world yesterday at a news conference, he pointed at you and he said that you and Hegseth are running Venezuela. So I was like, we're not the ones to blame for it.
Yeah, no, the fixation is that, I mean, if you think about America as the city on a hill from a democracy standpoint, right? If we're going to be exporting democracy, that used to be something that we were fond of. It's a bizarre way to export democracy, to stand at a press conference on United States soil and say, these Americans behind me are going to run your country because we say so. We are going to replace the authoritarian, bad guy leader that you just had with leaders of our choosing. That's our version, at least in the short term, of democracy in Venezuela.
And the leaders they signaled they were, at least at that time, in communication with Delcy Rodriguez, implicated in these same crimes that Maduro is implicated in.
So give us your take on how Venezuela is being run right now, and more importantly, how you see the shifting, if there are any shifting power structures in the country. We started our show tonight by kind of analyzing what potential role the Vice President, Delcy Rodriguez, may have played. We don't have any confirmation in it, but it seemed just the way the administration spoke about her, that there was some communication between her and Secretary of State Marco Rubio. There was some reporting as well from October in the Miami Herald. And then you also had the defense minister come out, and he was kind of very much a Maduro loyalist, still is, very much defiant, saying Nicolas Maduro is still the man in charge, and we're going to fight off this attempt to occupy us.
Well, they may have started by fighting it off when it was happening on Saturday morning. And the fact that they didn't, I think, does point to in the direction of some kind of deal being made by the higher echelons in the Maduro government, the ex-Maduro government. The question in part is, how far is the, Delcy Rodriguez and the other people now in power in Venezuela, how far are they willing to go to placate, right, either publicly or privately, what the demands are going to be imposed by Rubio and others? It seems clear that oil is the primary thing that Trump in particular wants. The question is whether or not Rubio will be satisfied by that. I think more broadly, and he's already hinted at it at the press conference, his primary aim is to effect regime change in Cuba. And I think he sees what's happening in Venezuela as a kind of trial run for how he might convince Trump for some kind of action in Cuba.
What does Rubio want from Cuba? I mean, there's obviously the very personal element of it for him. Cuba does not have crude oil, however. So what would he be selling Trump on there?
Ideology. And of course, he knows that Trump has zero interest in ideology. As James was talking about, I mean, Trump is not somebody who's going to be spreading democracy around the world. He has no problem meeting with authoritarian leaders from elsewhere, right? And so that's not the issue. So for Rubio, the question is not so much about democracy or authoritarianism. It's really more about left or right. And Latin America, of course, is a continent that its history over the 20th century has been marked by an ebb and flow between left wing and right wing, broadly speaking. And so he sees Cuba as the paragon of what leftism was at some point in Latin America. And if we can get rid of that, the continent is ours in terms of establishing a more neocon or right-wing vision for the 21st century.
But James, let me play for you what Marco Rubio said, because there is a question as to whether or not the legality of this is valid. Some say it's only valid if there's an act of war. An act of war had to be declared by Congress. But listen to what Marco Rubio said in his own words this morning.
There's not a war. I mean, we are at war against drug trafficking organizations. It's not a war against Venezuela. We are enforcing American laws with regards to oil sanctions. We have sanctioned entities. We go to court. We get a warrant. We seize those boats with oil. And that will continue.
So, I mean, they've kind of boxed themselves in. Donald Trump yesterday called this a war. He used the term war in describing what the U.S. did in Venezuela. Marco Rubio saying this is not a war. The U.S. is simply enforcing its own domestic laws. I've looked at the indictment. Some of the allegations of the indictment are well outside the jurisdiction of the United States. Owning a machine gun or possessing a machine gun. One of the allegations is trafficking cocaine domestically inside Venezuela. Some of it is to France, is one of the allegations. Some of it has to do with Mexico. None of those countries fall under the jurisdiction of the United States, and yet that's what the indictment is built on.
You're absolutely right. And I mean, there's sort of a split screen here. There's what happened and what is about to happen or what may happen over the coming days and weeks in Venezuela. And there's the Maduro aspect that is specific to Maduro. And without feeling any sympathy towards Maduro, there is a real double standard here. Think about it this way, and we've talked about this. 18 months ago, also resulting out of proceedings that took place in federal court in the state of New York and went up to the Supreme Court. 18 months ago, the Supreme Court of the United States declared that the U.S. president, the head of the United States, could not be held accountable for violations of U.S. law in a U.S. court. But the United States is taking the position that a head of a foreign state can be held accountable for violations of U.S. law in U.S. court. That is not a scenario where the United States looks like it believes in rule of law as so much as rule of man.
Though it might not make much of a difference in front of a judge here in New York. Alejandro, I want to go back to Cuba for a moment, in part for selfish reasons, because I have family that still lives on the island. And it's interesting. Cubans who are on the island still are different than Cubans in the United States, and particularly in South Florida in many ways, while they, too, want freedom, fair elections, and a functioning economy. They often at least say to me that they are terrified of the concept of being a vassal state to the U.S. They point sometimes to Puerto Rico and the challenges that Puerto Rico has. They have rolling blackouts, crumbling public schools, all the things that, you know, they were told if you are with the U.S., you're going to have all these nice things. It doesn't seem like it's always working out for that island. And so I guess I wonder what you think people on the island now are planning to do, preparing to do, if, in fact, it looks like if they are serious enough to do something like this in Venezuela. Marco Rubio clearly wants to do something like this in Havana, too, no?
Absolutely. And, you know, one of the interesting things about what the conditions that Rubio was talking about today, various shows, they're going to impose on Venezuela, on the new government, did not include, although it's absolutely part of it, is strangling the Cuban economy further than it is currently. Cuba has relied for almost 20 years on Venezuelan assistance, especially oil, and it's absolutely clear that that cannot continue. And so that's going already, as you know, the Cuban economy and society is in tremendously dire straits. And so my sense is that Rubio thinks, hey, if we cut this final spigot off, and then there are protests, as there have been in previous moments in Cuba, that will be our moment that we'll be able to say to Donald Trump, we can do what we did in Venezuela, in Cuba, and it's going to be great.
And it's not just Cuba, it's Mexico and Colombia as well that all were name-checked in yesterday's news conference. And Greenland in today's interview at The Atlantic, which we'll talk about in a second. James Sampa, Alejandro Velasco, thank you so much. Really appreciate both of you. Thank you.